You did embryology. You know it come from the rat case pouch. Why am I giving you this? This is not embryology class. But I need you to know that your thyroid actually develops somewhere in the brain, in the lower part of the brain, in a place called rat case pouch, and then it migrates. Right? So the thyroid gland develops in the floor of the primitive pharynx in the 3rd week of gestation, and it migrates down the thyroglossal duct to its final position in the anterior neck. That is the point. Forget about all this. This is anatomy stuff and embryology. That's not what I'm about to do this morning. Just know that it is formed way higher than its current location. Why do we need to know that? Because sometimes it gets lost in its transit. Sometimes it leaves its origin and it never makes it to its destination. And when it never makes it to its destination, it presents as a thyroglossal cyst at the base of the tongue. So you don't have a thyroid in its normal location. You have it higher up in the neck, and it presents as a thyroglossal cyst. How do you tell it from a normal thyroid? A normal thyroid moves with deglutition, with swallowing. Thyroglossal cyst does not move with swallowing. Rather, it moves with tongue protrusion. So tell the patient to stick out the tongue, and you see the cyst moves because the cyst is attached to the base of the tongue. Okay, so that's the point of the first 2 slides. Right? You're good? Excellent. And sometimes it doesn't even make it far down here. It gets stuck right there at the top of the tongue. So your thyroid is sitting on your tongue. Right? So you can have a lingual thyroid. The reason you can have these abnormalities, a lingual thyroid and the thyroglossal cyst, is because of that migration arrest of the thyroid gland, okay, from the roof of the 3rd on this way. So now when the thyroid gland is in its place, how does it really make thyroid hormone? I'm sure you've seen this before and also you know it. So how does it work? You take in iodide, and the thyroid gland take up the iodide with sodium through this mechanism of a importer, right? The iodide is now put out into the thyroid follicle through this membrane channel. Then the iodide is now converted into iodine, right? And once it is converted into iodine, it is spit out into the center. You know the thyroid follicle has thyroid cells, and then there is a pool in the center, which is like the soup of thyroid hormone, right? Okay. And the cells are like cooking it. You know, like in some villages, when they're having festivals, they cook in these big pots, and they have all these women with sticks and they're stirring the big pot of soup. That's exactly how the thyroid works. The thyroid cells are on the periphery, and then that big central pool is like a soup of thyroid. That's where thyroid hormone is being formed until it is ready to be secreted. So then the thyroid hormone is put into that pool as just iodine. Once it makes it there, thyroglobulin looks for it. And thyroglobulin binds it. And then that thyroglobulin can bind 1 or 2, so it forms MIT or DIT colloid. Once those are formed, those begin to come together. 1 MIT can come with 1 DIT and they form T3, or 2 DITs can come together and they form T4, or 2 MIT come together and they form DIT. Once you get T3 and T4, the product is ready to be put back into blood. That is picked up by lysosomes and secreted, and T3, T4 are put out into the circulation. Okay? And I give you the names of MIT and DIT over here. Thyroid specific, yada yada yada. You got that? Okay. So, once thyroid does not circulate in serum naked, no, it is carried, it is bound, right? So, you have protein binding. Why do hormones need to be bound to protein?
Longer half-life?
Thank you. We do that in pharmacology. The reason they have prevent them from being metabolized. If they circulate freely, they'll be picked up by their catabolic pathways and destroyed even before they make it to their destination. Right? So that's why they have to be bound. Protein binding increases the availability and decreases the clearance of hormones. So thyroid hormones are protein bound. Now, which one do you really need? T3 or T4? You need both. Because T3 is your active one and T4 is your reserve. And they are both bound. Okay? So generally in circulation, most of the T4s are bound except about 0.03% of it. And most of your T3s are bound except about 0.3% of it. Okay? So remember, it's a bound hormone. Why is it important to know that thyroid hormone is bound? Because that means if you have any disease that interferes with your serum protein, it would affect with how much of this is in your circulation. Okay? For instance, albumin is produced in the liver. If you have liver cirrhosis and you don't have albumin, that would affect the amount of your thyroid that you can carry in your circulation. And it will make your thyroid function test look weird. Right? In pregnancy, you have a lot of proteins, right? Including albumin. So, again, you bind it a hell of a lot more than you would have, a normal person would have bound, right? And then your thyroid function test will be screwed in some way. We'll talk more about that specifically. I'm just giving you reasons why you should be aware of that. So, thyroid binding abnormalities, they interfere with thyroid hormone measurements. You see, when you do thyroid function test, you can get low levels of thyroid hormones in patients with congenital deficiencies of thyroid hormone, but in nephrotic syndrome, in liver cirrhosis, in protein-losing enteropathies, in malnutrition, in androgen steroids use and glucocorticoid steroid use. You know what protein-losing enteropathies are? Did that in GI?
What is it?
Protein-losing enteropathy. Okay, just take a look at the name. Enteropathy is a gut disease, right? It loses protein. Right? So you have like lymphomas that interfere with the pores, the integrity of the intestinal pores, in such a way that it allows protein to seep from blood into gut. Okay? So they are usually lymphatic disorders, right? That will allow you, like for instance, if you have a thoracic duct, or you block the lymphatic channels, right, that is supposed to carry the interstitial fluid and return it to the circulation. Well, if you block that because you have an abdominal lymphoma or you have abdominal tuberculosis, then those lymphatic channels are they're not going to be able to drain the lymph from the gut to the blood. And the lymph is going to accumulate and the protein in it is going to seep into the lumen of the gut. So that is what all of the collection of those diseases are called protein-losing enteropathies. Okay? So they will cause exactly the same thing as nephrotic syndrome, when you're peeing protein in urine, liver cirrhosis when you're not able to form the protein, or you're losing it in the dog, or you're not eating it like you should. Alright? So whenever you have low levels of these thyroid binding levels, see what happens. It leads to low levels of total T4s in the blood. It conveys the false impression of thyroid hormone deficiency. You got that? That is why we don't depend on total T4. We always look for free T4. Okay? We look for free T4. Got that? And then higher levels, see, somebody with congenital excess, pregnancy, hepatobiliary disease, porphyria, oral contraception, tamoxifen, clofibrin, they lead to high levels of total T4s in the blood. Again, they convey the false impression of thyroid hormone excess. That is why you need to know that thyroid hormones are protein bound. So anything that affects body protein concentration will affect their levels in the blood test. Okay? Got that? Sometimes we like to know. You see, free T4 index is a surrogate for free T4. In the United States, you can measure free T4 very easily. No problem. Just send it to the lab, they can and they will. In many developing countries, you can't measure free T4s. You have to estimate free T4 by what is called the free T4 index. Okay? So what happens? How do you know how do you estimate free T4? Or how do you compute free T4 index? First of all, you have to know that you get the patient serum, a normal patient that doesn't have any thyroid problem has this much total T4, right? And part of it is free. Some of it is bound by TBG. This is TBG, right? So this is total T4 from here to here. This portion of it is free and circulating. This is TBG. This TBG is carrying some of the T4, right? But it's not 100% saturated. It has some free site on there, right? If you want to estimate the amount of T4 that is free, all you need to estimate that is to know what the total is and what proportion of it is bound by TBG, right? Right? Mm-hmm. You want to know, if you don't have a direct access to measure free T4, you can compute it if you know what the total T4 is and you know what percentage of total T4 is bound by TBG, right? So how do you know what percentage of T4 is bound by TBG? It's very simple. You put a resin, a radio labeled T3 tracer. You add it to the patient serum first, and then followed by an exchange resin on top to take up your bound labeled T3. Result is reported as percentage of tracer. Too much grammar. Basically, what you do is you add a radioactive T3 to the system. That radioactive T3 will now occupy the unoccupied site on TBG, right? And there will be some of it left. Now, you now put in a resin to bind that T3. You can now determine how much of the T3 is bound by your resin. Well, the amount of the T3 that is bound by the resin depends on the amount of the T3 that found room on TBG. You got that? So, if TBG is so empty, right, a lot of the T3 you're adding into the system will bind to TBG. By the time you put your resin, there will be little T3 left. And you can now find out what is your resin uptake, right? So that's why the test is called T3 resin uptake. In other words, when we added T3 to the system, how much of it was left for the resin? The amount of T3 that was left for the resin to take up is a direct correlate of the amount of T3 that did not bind to TBG, which is directly related to the amount of free space on TBG, which again is directly related to the amount of T4 in the system. If you get that, it's kind of long and convoluted, but it's very simple. Yeah, right. It's simple. Let's do it again. Right? You have T4 in the system. Some of it is free, some of it is bound by TBG. We know that. We also know that on TBG, there is still some empty space, depending on the amount of T4 that is in the system. Right? So these are bound TBG. These are free spaces. How do we estimate the percentage of T4 that is free? We can't, because we know the total. We know the total is made up of the free and the bound. But we don't have access to measuring the bound. But we know that TBG binds that bound component and it carries some extra space. So we will add a radioactive, that is a T3 that we can track. We add it into the system. We know it will bind to that unoccupied space, right? So the T3 we added will bind some of these places, right? And the remaining will be in the system. We can track it. We will now add, how do we now know how much of the T3 we added got bound? Well, we know how much we added, and we know there is some floating around the system. How do we know how much is floating around the system? We add a resin to track that particular T3. Right? So now, if we know how much of our resin, how much of T3 is taken by our resin, we know how much of it was left. Then we know how much of it was bound. We know how much of space there was on TBG. And with that, we can compute what the total. And we know the total. With that, we can compute what the free is. You got that? It's a very simple logical step, right?
Just gotta follow.
So that is the basis. This is in cases of somebody who is euthyroid, and now see what happens in pregnancy. This is a way to illustrate how pregnancy and cirrhosis can affect your thyroid function test, especially when you don't have access to measuring free T4 index. So you have a pregnant patient. She's euthyroid here. She has the same level of TBG as this one, and now she got pregnant. She has a hell of a lot more TBG, right? And because she has a lot more TBG, she's going to bind more T4s, right? And she's going to have a lot more space of unbound. When I now add my T3 to it, see what happens? My T3 will have a lot more room to fix. When I add the resin uptake will be less because there's a lot more room on TBG, right? Even though the free percentage did not change, the total T4 is increased because of increased binding protein that is available to it. You got that? Yeah. Are you with me? Okay. Why do we need thyroid hormone? Well, thyroid hormone is your 10W, what's that thing? That puts your engine on. 10W. Huh?
Engine?
Yeah.
Like 10W40.
Yeah, 10W40, whatever that is. Right. So that's in there. Right. So the thyroid hormone is like engine oil, right? It's the reason everything works the way it should work. Or it's involved with every single metabolism in the body. And the reason it can do that is because its site of action is within the nucleus. Okay? So you have the transport hormone, the free hormone comes out, it's lipid soluble, it diffuses into the cells, goes into the nucleus, interact with the DNA, forms messenger RNA, they come out into the cytosol, look for a ribosome, sit on it, maintain new protein, and that new protein comes out and does what proteins do. It could be a whole enzyme, it could be hormone, it could be whatever. But this is a basic mechanism by which thyroid hormone function. It interferes with DNA and the genes. Okay? Now, you release T4, that's what you release. But what is responsible for the action of thyroid hormone is T3. Okay? T4 is your hormone, but the one that actually gets the job done is T3. And generally speaking, T3 is formed at the site where thyroid hormone is supposed to work. Okay? So, in the liver, thyroid hormone will increase cholesterol synthesis, cholesterol reabsorption, conversion to bile acids, fatty acid oxidation, gluconeogenesis. It mobilizes the fat. That's why you lose weight when you have too much of it. It causes heart rate to increase, heart to enlarge. It suppresses TSH. It increases growth hormone at the pituitary level. It increases protein catabolism and glucose utilization and fatty oxidation. It enhances growth and maturation of the bones. How do we regulate thyroid function? Right? Do you want the thyroid function, the thyroid hormone to be out there doing all this crazy stuff at all times? No. So there is a lot of mechanism for regulating thyroid function. So you recognize that this means inhibition, right? Okay. And this means stimulation. So how is the thyroid hormone regulated? You have Can you all see?
Mm-hmm.
Can you see?
Mm-hmm.
No, I know you can't see.
We can see it right here.
I can see here.
Yeah.
Good. Backwards, man. So, you have cold, for instance, you will release TRH, right? Direction releasing hormone, thyroid releasing hormone. That goes and immediately and releases thyroid stimulating hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone comes to the thyroid gland and stimulates the release of T4 in the periphery, usually at the target site. If the organ needs thyroid hormone, it will convert T4 to T3. But if the organ does not need thyroid hormone, you know what it does? It converts T4 to reverse T3 to protect itself. If it doesn't need it, it doesn't need thyroid hormone burning it out, right? So it will convert T4 to reverse T3. And look at the difference between active T3 and reverse T3. You see the difference? Can anybody tell me what the difference
It's an
is?
extra iodine.
Exactly. So you just lose one iodine and that's it, and that inactivates it. So it gets there, but it doesn't do what it would normally do, right? Then look at this here. This is very important. There are two effects. So reverse T3 is the inactive form of T3 formed from T4 to block the effect of T3 for energy conservation. All right? So now, there are two effects. Of course, you can see that TSH has a negative feedback at the hypothalamus level. T3 has a negative feedback on TSH and also at the hypothalamus level. Are you tracking that? T4 has a negative impact on both the TSH, on the thyroid and hypothalamus. So both T4 and T3, they inhibit TSH and TRH release. You can see that, right? But there is something interesting here. When iodine is put into the system, by however you get it, remember that under the influence of TSH, thyroid hormone uses thyroglobulin and iodine in your diet to make T4. Right? That is what normal is. When you have acute iodide load, when there is too much iodine in the system, he has a way of inhibiting the coupling of thyroglobulin and iodine. But he also has a way of stimulating an iodide. He has a way of binding to thyroglobulin and increasing T4 formation. What is interesting is that what it does depends on the situation that the patient is in. That is why we call it by two different names. Wolff-Chakoff effect is an dead pointer. It's an autoregulatory reduction in the synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormone following the ingestion of large amount of iodine. Okay? If you, as a normal person, consume too much iodine, you will decrease the amount of T4 that is formed by this Wolff-Chakoff effect. Okay? Okay, it is inhibitory. Acute iodine load in a normal person will shut it down. Right? Jod-Basedow effect is iodine-induced hyperthyroidism following the exposure of a patient with goiter to iodine load in a new region with a lot of iodine. So somebody is coming from Burundi, right? And they have a goiter because because there isn't a lot of iodine in the environment. Then they get to Chicago, and now there is a lot of salt, a lot of iodine in common salt, table salt. They already have goiter. So when they were in Burundi, they have the factory, but they don't have the material. And they were able to function. They come to America, now you fill the factory with iodine. They go straight into thyrotoxicosis. Right? So they go from goiter to hypothyroidism. Right? That one is what is called John-based. They are both due to acute iodine load. But Wolff-Chakoff is in a normal person, he turns it off. Whereas Jod-based brings it on. Another way it happens is somebody may have come here from, say from, where? Tell me something. What is the village in South America? Somebody give me a very rural area in South America.
The Amazon.
Guatemala.
Guatemala, okay.
Go to it.
Say this person come from rural area of Guatemala, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now they have a goiter, but the goiter has not bothered them. And then they come here because now somebody invited them and they've been coughing and now they have this health insurance and they want to do CT scan of the chest with contrast because they've been having this long time cough. Well, contrast, one thing you need to know about contrast is it has a lot of iodine. So you expose this person with a goiter to a lot of iodine and guess what? You precipitate acute hypothyroidism in the same patient. That would be a job-based effect because it's happening in a patient that has that problem already. Good. So, because of all these problems, there are a lot of factors that modulate the way we look at thyroid function, right? So, thyroid function is modulated by a lot of stuff. Here are factors that contribute to proper production of thyroid hormones: iron, iodine, thyroxine, zinc, selenium, vitamin E, B2, B3. Am I telling you to memorize all this? No, I'm just letting you know that whenever you do thyroid function test, that result can be affected by a lot of stuff. Okay? Factors that increase the conversion of T3 to reverse T4 to reverse T3: stress, trauma, low calorie, inflammation, toxin, infection, liver disease, certain medication. That is the reason we don't do thyroid function test on admission. You don't do thyroid function test on patients when they are on a hospital bed. You do it in outpatient. All right? Factors that inhibit production of thyroid hormone, again, stress, infection, fluoride, toxin, all that. Factors that increase conversion of T4 to T3, selenium and zinc. Reverse T3 and T3 compete for binding sites. That's correct. That's how it works. And factors that improve sensitivity to thyroid hormone, vitamin A, exercise, and zinc. This is the most useless slide with a lot of information, a lot of nothing on that slide. Okay? Because if you look at the list I gave you, a lot of overlap, right? So that's why I want to, don't pay too much attention to it. Don't try to memorize what it is. The reason I put this slide up here is for you to know that thyroid hormone is one of the mostly influenced hormones in the body. It can be influenced by infection, by stress, by medication, by vitamins and everything. So when you see abnormal thyroid function test, ask your patient, do you take any supplements? Do you take any drugs? Are you on any kind of stress right now? Because we don't do it in the hospital because the hospitalization is stressful. But try to do a thyroid function test in a woman whose son is trying to sell the house from under her after her husband died. She's under this more stress than the one in the hospital. And that stress will equally affect the thyroid function test. So that is the point I'm trying to make with this slide. Okay? when people get hospitalized, the body changes the way the thyroid function works. Right? I already told you this. And this is the reason you don't want to do a thyroid function test in a sick patient, because of this thing called the sick euthyroid syndrome. Sick euthyroid syndrome is the abnormal thyroid function test result you see in a sick person. They don't have a thyroid disease because they're euthyroid. Euthyroid means you are normal. You're normal. That's what it means to be euthyroid. You're hyperthyroid when your thyroid is doing overwork. You're hypothyroid when your thyroid is not working. You're euthyroid when your thyroid is normal. So when we say the sick euthyroid syndrome is really an abnormal thyroid function test in a sick patient that has normal thyroid function. It is also known as low T3 syndrome or low T4 syndrome, because when they call it low T3, what?
CDU?
Low T3 and low T4. What is that? Why is it like
I don't know.
Why is the PowerPoint still working?
The generators, bro? Yeah.
Fuse blue. I bring the fuse. Yeah, that's it. So you see, when somebody gets, once somebody gets hospitalized, see what the body does. It downregulates T3, it downregulates T4, downregulates free T4, increases the production of reverse T3. The idea is to conserve the energy for the sick person to recover. Right? This is the reason we don't do thyroid function test in the sick people. This thing is called by so many names. It's also known as non-thyroid illness syndrome, euthyroid sick syndrome, low T4, low T3 syndrome, all kind of names. But all I need you to know from here is that don't do thyroid function test in people that are hospitals. Okay? All right. So when you do thyroid function test, basically, depending on where you are, you might do TSH. You will never do TSH because it's so hard to measure in some developing countries. You will do T3, T4, and T3 retin uptake, right? But in America, because you're going to be in America, you basically just need the TSH and 3T4. That's all you need. Okay? And some people now say, oh, forget 3T4, we just use TSH. Don't do that. Always do TSH and 3T4. So when you see high TSH and 3T4 is low, that means you have primary hypothyroidism, right? Right? If you have high TSH, normal 3T4, that is what we call a subclinical hypothyroidism. This means that, you see, your TSH will never go high if you have enough 3T4. So if your TSH is going up and your free T4 stays normal, that means you need more free T4 than your body is making. And because the patient is not symptomatic, we call it a subclinical hypothyroidism. Okay? Whenever you have abnormal TSH in the presence of normal free T4, we call it subclinical. Okay? If it is happening in the context of low TSH, you will call it a subclinical hyper. Right? If it is happening in the context of a high TSH, you call it a subclinical hypo. Get that? Very important, because this is very common. You don't treat it. If it is not symptomatic clinically, you don't treat it, just monitor it. Okay? And the way you know it's a subclinical entity is when you have abnormal TSH and free T4 is normal. Get that? Okay. So if you have a high TSH, a low TSH and high T4, that is how thyrotoxicosis presents. If you have low TSH and normal free T4, that's your subclinical, and if both of them are low, that is your PT3 hypothyroidism. Now I want you to see something. You see why they keep putting thyroiditis and thyroiditis over here? That is because thyroiditis infection or inflammation of the thyroid gland. What happens is, in the early phase, when the thyroid gets infected, most of the time by viruses, some of the thyroid cells may die. When they die, they will release the hormone in them, right? So you will get a high free T4 level, right? And that can actually suppress your TSH, right? But after the infection and the cells are dead, and you don't have enough of them to make free T4, your free T4 goes down and your TSH goes down. That is why in the early stage when they're dying, they can release the content, they have the thyroid hormone, and they will give you this. And when they're dead, they give you this. That's why it appears in both places. Okay, I'm going to stop here, and then we will pick it up next week. And I'll finish this one and then go to parathyroid. I think I'll catch up one day. But so far, so good. Any questions?